Hi, everyone. It is 2 o'clock Eastern. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Harper. I am so excited to have this conversation for so many reasons. I am a recovery specialist with C4 Innovations. I'm also a woman living in abstinence-based long-term recovery. And for me, that means I have not had any drugs or alcohol since March 25th of 2001. I'm also a mother in recovery recently. Just started having kids about 3.5 years ago. And I have to tell you that a whole new world opened up for me when that happened. I'm really grateful to be joined by some amazing, awesome, just incredible mothers here for this conversation today. As we are chit-chatting together on the screen, you will be able to also join the conversation via chat. So please feel free to enter in questions for myself or for our panelists, along with any of the comments that you want to get into the conversation with us. We would love that so much. Just quickly, just to cover some of the technology that we're using, of course, this is Zoom, and everybody is pretty well aware of how to use Zoom, especially after 2020. So again, audio is available through your computer, or you can call in on the phone like I am. You are in a listen-only mode, so that means that you can chat with us through the chat box. We do hope that you will be interactive. We'd love chatting with you while we're talking. And if you have any questions, again, you can use the Q&A box or you can use the chat, whichever one you'd like. If you would like to rename yourself, maybe add your pronouns, mine are she, hers, for example, then you can do that underneath the participant option on your menu, and it says rename within that, and you can add your pronouns or your company or where you're from. I think we'll go ahead and just point out the closed caption option as well. There's a live transcript available at the bottom of your menu if you're looking for closed caption. And then if you want to chat to everybody, please make sure that the large blue box in your chat box says all panelists and attendees. For some reason, Zoom likes to throw us a curveball and just make it to all panelists. So we want to make sure that gets to everybody by selecting all panelists and attendees. So we're going to go ahead and get to this conversation. I know we just are coming off of Mother's Day. Mother's Day really invokes all sorts of feels for folks, right? So some of us celebrate it, some of us mourn it. I personally really looked forward to the nap that I got on Mother's Day. It was really phenomenal. I have to say that being in recovery since I was 21 and having kids later in life, I would like to make amends and make an apology to everyone out there who I thought I knew what I was talking about being a parent before I actually had parents in recovery. I'm really grateful for these other moms that are joining me today that have really given me some ideas about how to mother in recovery, regardless of the stage that my kids are in, right? Early baby kids or grown-up kids, they're still our babies, right? At 27, 30, however old they are. So today we are joined by Patti, Ileana, Hannah, and Jewel, and I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to hop to a conversation that I hope you all will find as interesting and beneficial as I have. So Patti, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Kristen, for putting this together and putting this on a platform like C4. There's not a lot of conversations about mothering in recovery. It's not something that's usually centered. My name is Patti Heffernan. I'm a person in long-term recovery since 2001 on March 17th. And what I do now, as I am the co-owner of Helios Recovery Services, we do training and consulting for recovery coaches in the CCAR model. And my specific lane at Helios Recovery is working with families who are involved with CPS and getting substance use recovery and support to families and parents that are involved with CPS and due to their substance use or mental health. And I help them navigate those systems and advocate for themselves and help them get connected with recovery resources in their area that work for them, because not necessarily everything will work for everyone. And I'm just glad to have the opportunity to talk about it here today. So thanks.
Thank you, Patti. We're really grateful that you're here as well. Jewel, how about you introduce yourself? Thanks for joining us from Philly.
Yes, all the way from Philadelphia. I am Jewel. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I am a peer support specialist. I work with people who have come from different pathways, from substance abuse to mental health disorders, eating disorders, depression. And I also help get the participants connected to resources that it may not be easy for them to get to. I work my hardest to get those resources to them because I have a passion in helping people, specifically because I know how it was in active addiction. So I'm willing to help those get where I am today. I am a mother of 4, and that's it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you. Glad to be here. My name is Hannah Pomales, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also a mom, and I am the clinical research coordinator at Center for Great Expectations here in New Jersey. And what I focus on in terms of research and treatment and program evaluation is within primarily Mommy and Me residential and outpatient and supportive housing programs and services. My work intersects with adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, and trauma, parenting stress, and treatment outcomes over time. So I think that's about it. Glad to be here.
Sorry, I just totally did this great introduction for Ileana. Let me start over, and I was muted. Saying you're probably the farthest geographical location today from Puerto Rico.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so my name is Ileana Rivera. I am a person in long-term recovery. I started my recovery back in 1994. I have a abstinence-based pathway that I chose, and I am currently coming to you from Puerto Rico. I'm here on vacation. I am so happy to be here, but I'm also so happy to be with you all. This is a great panel of women that I am honored to be with, and I am looking forward to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ileana. Thank you so much for taking time out of your vacation too. I really appreciate it. So one of the things that I love, thank you so much. One of the things that I love about this panel, besides the fact that you're all, badass mamas, is this idea that we're all kind of attacking this topic from a variety of different angles, right? So I'd love to hear from your perspective of where you sit in the work. What are the barriers that mothers are experiencing and really kind of flourishing in their recoveries with their children, within their families? And I'll start with Jewel. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm sorry, repeat that. I had my thing turned down and I did not hear you. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's okay. So one of the things I think that's really great about this is that we're all coming from different angles of the problem, right? Which is helping to connect women and mothers to resources to help them flourish as mothers in their recovery. So what are the barriers that you're seeing, or maybe that you've experienced, that prevented you from that connection with your family?
So for me, a big barrier for me was willingness. Not being willing to go and get the resources, because part of my story is the resources was always there. I just was not willing to allow the support to support me. I wasn't open and willing. And I think that is a first knowing what support looks like. and understanding how important it is, because that was my number one barrier, not being open and willing to accept it, because it was always there. It was always there. I just wasn't willing to go get it, so, I always, as a peer support specialist, I emphasize, the support is here, and I also use my experience, this is what works for me, and that's really it. I keep it simple like that, it works for me. Tell them a little bit about me, and this is what works for me, and with the hopes that they take it.
And just a quick follow-up on that, Jewel, do you feel like, I know when I was in my active addiction and I shared that unwillingness with you, but I think mine came from a place of not understanding and being fearful of change, and not understanding that there was support available to help me and to support me with that change. Do you feel like that you kind of identify, so you shaking your head, maybe that's where the unwillingness came from?
Or judgment, afraid of being judged, afraid of being talked to and not talked to, if that makes sense. Afraid of somebody saying what I should have done, and what I need to do. That made me rebel. Once I had somebody present that non-judgmental, it was over for me. It was like, wow, this really can happen. So that, that not being afraid, the fear of being judged.
Yeah. Not to mention even some of the punitive, right? I was always scared of criminal justice, even though we probably shouldn't even call it that, but the system intervening for me, right? So yeah, that's a whole nother layer we'll talk about.
I was about to add to that, but because their support too, it's just that, again, I didn't allow them to support me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. And we'll circle back to that. That's a really great point. So Hannah, in some of the work that you're doing from your perspective in the research realm, what are you seeing as some of the barriers that maybe we should focus on as a community of advocates?
Yeah, this is a great question, and something that I focus on in a lot of my research, just in terms of barriers and obstacles to access to care and to services. One thing, there's a few points that I want to make here. One is that overall, generally speaking, what I have seen and what a lot of the research suggests is that, generally speaking, some of the barriers to people who are engaged in treatment and then discharged from treatment of any kind, especially residential treatment, just don't have that buffer of wraparound services, whether that is reentry programs, education, employment, childcare. They don't have housing. So we're talking about basic needs, and we're talking about sustainability. Those are by far and large, when I speak to residents of programs, when I speak to people in the community, when I speak to parents, especially single parents and single mothers, those are by far the biggest obstacles, anecdotally speaking. There's a few other things that I do want to mention, though, because and this goes for saying when it comes to mothering and recovery, even beyond this question, but I think there is sort of this collective or universal experience that a lot of mothers in recovery can identify with. But there are layers to these obstacles. It's not just all inside of a vacuum of all mothers in recovery based on their intersecting identities experience obstacles the same way. So we know the research at large suggests that Black, Indigenous people of color who are also moms or parents are experiencing higher rates of ACE scores, of parenting stress, of all of the structural obstacles and stress underneath that are increasing parenting stress. And what I mean by structural stress are things like having difficulty finding housing, having difficulty finding quality healthcare, having difficulty finding access to transportation to get from one place to the next, or get to a meeting if that's their pathway, or whatever it is. And so, as much as I think there is a lot of general or universal similarities among mothers in recovery and obstacles, it is not a one size fits all. And the research does show that people who identify with a marginalized identity, people who come from disenfranchised communities, are experiencing a lot more obstacles.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a really helpful just beginning peek into some of the more nuanced conversations that this 1 hour session will not be able to do justice to. So I really appreciate you introducing additional topics that need to be followed up on. Ileana, how about in your work, in your peer work especially, what are some of the barriers or obstacles that you come across over the years?
Let's see. So I would say I started my recovery back in '94, like I said, so the landscape was a lot different. So I was in a residential treatment facility that accepted children. So I went through treatment, a 1-year inpatient program, a therapeutic community program with my children. And I would say, as like Jewel, there was a lot of resources available, but because I didn't understand that I had such a serious illness, that I was not, and that there were these services available for me and my children. And so until I got into the treatment program, where my eyes opened up, and I was then, made aware of all the things that me and my children needed. At that point, I was able to take advantage of a lot of the resources that were available in Boston as well. It's so rich with resources, and throughout the years, it's gotten a lot better. And so I was really blessed to be in the Boston area to do my recovery, to work my recovery and recovery of my children. I would say that one of the biggest barriers for me as a mother in recovery was getting my children well at the same time that I was getting well. And that was such a difficult challenge because I had suffered severe trauma, and so had my children, because of my active drug addiction. So I was trying to heal and help them to heal. And it was this cycle that was very, kept me in this really unhealthy place, because the guilt of their trauma, the guilt of their pain, and the guilt of the behaviors that they were displaying, I took upon myself, and of course blamed myself for all of it. And so it was very difficult for me to then heal and take care of them at the same time. So those were one of the biggest barriers that I faced, and how I worked through that was through therapy. I did a lot of individual therapy. I did a lot of family therapy. I did, at the time, I went through a 12-step program at the time, but I went through let's say through the fellowship. My program was not a 12-step program that I was living in. It was a therapeutic community, and it was completely abstinence-based. So that program that's what the philosophy was there. But I did attend 12-step meetings and things like that, because at the time there was not a lot of options. in 94. So I did what was available in my community. And I'm very grateful for all those services that were available at that time. And as my recovery continued, I just kept, you know, taking advantage and trying to do the best I could for, you know, my well-being and the well-being of my kids. One of the biggest dreams I had as a person, when I was at the end of my addiction, my active addiction, I knew that there was something in my gut that was telling me, this is not your life, you know. And I would look out the window and I would see people getting ready for work and going to school. I lived in Brooklyn, New York, in the projects, and I lived on a main street, and I used to look down and there were families out there going to work, taking their kids to daycare. And I always said, that's what I want. I want to be a mom that takes her kids to daycare, to school, to go to a PTA meeting, to drive a minivan, because at that time, that was the hottest vehicle for families at the time. And I wanted that so desperately. That would have meant to me that I made it, that I'm a normal family. And honestly, once I started in my process, I dedicated my whole entire world to my children and to my recovery. And I was able to go to PTA meetings. I did get a minivan. I did all those things. But I took advantage of the resources that were available. And yes, there were barriers. Yes, there were challenges and obstacles that I had to jump over. But that's what my life was about at that point in the 90s when, yeah, a long time ago. So
Thanks,
that's
Ileana.
all, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I'm reassured to hear that the minivan situation was something of a goal, because I did just buy one 3 months ago and had some mixed feelings about it. So I have now changed my perception thanks to that story and the hope that you just delivered. So Patti, I'd love to come over to you. You know, your work is you've got so much variety in what you do. What are you seeing from your perspective with some of the women that you're working with?
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough time, but so there was just so many great things that were already talked about that do touch on a lot of like what I do, both personally in my own personal journey of being a person in recovery and being a mom, and then the professional stuff, and then everything from the like micro individual level to the systemic. So I love that we have a wide range of like micro to macro to all of the things that are involved in this. And so, oh gosh, there's so many things. So I guess I'll start with the micro stuff. And I heard things about like unwillingness and things like that. And when I work with women who are involved with CPS or are thinking that they want to seek recovery because they're pregnant, but they won't go and get any resources whatsoever. Not because they're unwilling, not because there's something wrong with them, not because there's some sort of shame-based something wrong with them. It's because they know they're going to get their baby taken away and they're not wrong. And that's why women don't show up for those services in the first place. It's not about unwillingness. It's not about stubbornness or selfishness or not caring about somebody's kids. It's about the fear of having that removed, having, you know, one thing that I say a lot about motherhood, something that nobody told me about motherhood, is that once, you know, that child is born, your heart is now wandering around outside of your body and there's no way to protect it anymore. Like all of my defenses, all of my walls, all the things that made me confident and kept myself safe, gone. Forget about it. None of that exists anymore. So to have that threatened, why would anybody go there for help? Why would anybody make themselves vulnerable to that? Because those are our approaches. And that, you know, it's assumed that when you show up in these places, that you should accept some kind of shame, that you do deserve that kind of like, well, you just need to do it our way or get out of here type thing, or there's something wrong with you, which brings me to the systemic piece, because the system avoids accountability by shoving this all on the individual, right? And there is definitely individual accountability that needs to happen. Like there's definitely steps that need to go forward. But in order for somebody to basically like jump over a mountain to be able to do the simple things that we're asking them to do, there's got to be some trust. There's got to be trust, big time trust. And if those things are not in place, then that unwillingness is going to be there. That's not something that's wrong with the individual. That's something that's wrong with the environment that they're in, or the entire life of their experiences prior to that are in. So that trust is going to take so long to build. So that fear of like being hurt, and that knowing that accepting this help means you have to also accept this shame. And you have to own that and say that, yep, I am this. And it's not even just like I did this or I have done this. It's about I am this. And that's how it's approached a lot of times systemically, especially when we're talking about social services, especially when we're talking about 12-step communities. And when it comes, like the needs of women are different than men in a lot of ways. The needs of people who are transgendered in the LGBT community are different in a lot of ways, because while yes, there are, you know, certain individuals who need to come to a 12-step meeting and sit down and shut up and learn something, that is the last thing most women need. That is the root of their trauma. That is the root of everybody who's ever had to be in the closet. Like, we can't expect them to have just this one pathway. And then let's talk about that, because I spent my personal lived experience with CPS is that I was a foster child and I aged out of the system. And I watched my own mother jump through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop. I always say that, like, even though that we don't really have a relationship today, I know that my mother walked through fire to try to get me back. And there was a lot of systemic things that were in the way that could have really been helpful, because the process was this. And I really thought when I got back into this lane, in the professional lane, I thought, oh, well, it's really, after talking to all these people, it really seems like a lot of things have changed, until I started working with families. And once I got down back to that micro level, I realized experientially, nothing has changed, nothing. And so what would happen with my mom while I was placed outside of the home was that they would offer her resources. They would offer her this support. It would get really close to, okay, Patty's going to come back home now because you're doing so great. You're doing so good, but you need to do it on your own. So we're going to pull these supports away to see if you're going to do it or not, see if you're willing or not. Right. But now that trust and that support that was there, it's not there anymore. And every time my mom would fall on her face, and every time it was another year before we were even talking about it again. Right. And then by the time that I did get home, I hadn't seen any of her process. She hadn't seen any of mine. I was a different kid, first of all, just because even if you don't have any like trauma going on, like if you're a parent and you have kids that were age 11 to age 15, they're a completely different kid. Their interests are completely different. Their bodies, their attitudes, everything is completely different. So we were essentially coming back in as strangers with no ongoing support, which comes back to that systemic thing, right? But it was the individual's fault, because now it was me making bad choices, because then we get to avoid the accountability. But we're asking all of these families and these women, you need to take accountability for your actions. You need to think about how this affects other people. But the system itself is not even willing to do any of the things that it's asking of the people that it's supposedly serving or helping. So, and I just also really wanted to share, like, in my own, because I struggled as a mother in recovery too, because, you know, that fear of having your kids removed was like very real to me. To this day, it's still very real to me. I mean, when I am like losing my mind on my kids because they didn't clean up the toothpaste on the sink, that is all related to me being afraid that somebody's going to come in here and say, I'm not fit, I'm not good enough. Whew, I'm gonna get a little teary-eyed that I'm not good enough to have them. So we got to clean this up because I'm in danger, because there's a mess here and somebody's going to come in and take my kids for it, right? And for me, there's been so many different things, but I can relate to the minivan thing, because for me, that was home ownership. Because people like me we don't own homes. We don't have nothing. We had nothing. The house that I was removed from had a literal dirt floor in the basement that was built. Like we were poor on the bottom of the food chain there. It's like almost as low as you can be. And so like the day that I got to sign my house, I was like, yes, we made it. I so very much can relate and identify with that. And I don't want to take up too much time, but the stigma in the recovery community also has the attitude, so we have people who are in the systemic side that we're constantly explaining, like, no, substance use is a medical condition, punitive measures don't work, and here's why, and here's how. And we're trying to explain it to people who have never been through it. And then we come over to the recovery community and somebody who's struggling with CPS, and then that community also just assumes that because, they knew that they were wrong, so they should have gone to jail. They assume that family was wrong and that kids should have been removed. And that's just not the case. Most of the time, it's not the case. It's very rare that removal actually really, truly needs to happen. And there's a lot of systemic things in the way that drive that. And then, so where do those women go for support? I mean, at very best, like, it's considered an outside issue, so we just don't talk about it. Like, that's the best case scenario. And I'm sorry, but if somebody took my babies, I would need to talk about it every opportunity I got. I mean, otherwise it would kill me. So there's just so many layers to this, but I don't want to, there's lots more to go. So I'll just be quiet for now, but thanks. I look forward to I've got like the mama recovery nod going. I'm just like, yes, for everything that everybody just said. And I think I would like to talk about the stigma, because I do truly believe that stigma is honestly the biggest barrier. It directs policy, it directs medical care, it directs discrimination. And, I can say even at almost 20 years into my recovery, when I had my son this past December, I had a new doctor. And during some of the prep before I went into labor, I disclosed my recovery status, right? We don't have to do that. We can keep it secret. But I wanted to disclose because I wanted to make sure that I got really good medical care and I had some alternatives to choose from in the way of pain management. And so, my experience after disclosing my recovery status was a very different experience than before I had disclosed my recovery status. And that was by choice, right? That wasn't from a drug test, for my child. That wasn't a drug test for me. It wasn't from a sample. That was by choice. And so, when a woman is in a situation where they don't have the choice to disclose or not, that's a whole nother layer of stigma that's attached, right? It's like, oh, we caught you. We got you. You're a bad mom. And so I'd love to chat with y'all just about some of the healing that has taken place over the years individually, and some maybe support that you're offering others in the way of navigating the stigma that we're challenged with. And, I'll just open it up to whoever wants to go first around this topic, because I know it's definitely emotional for all of us to talk about, but it's a real thing and very important too. Anybody like to start?
I'll go. For me, going back a little bit, what we was just talking about with, for where Patricia is CPS, where I am is DHS, Department of Human Services, right? So I made a decision while I was living in a recovery residence, before I returned back to society. My family said they would keep my children, and we're not giving them back to you this time because we're tired of you coming back and forth, right? So that didn't go as planned. While I was in the sober living, they constantly called me. So as mom, I'm helpless because they're calling me about my kid. What am I supposed to do? So The stigma came in where when I made the decision, I called DHS. I utilized DHS as my support. I used them as their support because I went in with the mindset, as long as I do what I'm supposed to do, they have to do what they're supposed to do. Right? So as I went, the stigma came when you need to leave that place right now. How dare you? How dare you send my niece or my cousin to where she can be harmed, you know? But that support, like we are, I had those kind of people on my team outside of family. I had those people, I had my family support me as well, you know, in their own way, because there's levels to support. I understand now, you know, so I had the support on the other end saying, you know, you can do this. And whatever you need, we got you, including my employer, you know, so I am, you know, as a peer support specialist, I don't give advice and I don't give suggestions, but if my participant is in a situation similar to that, I will ask them if they mind me sharing that. I want to give that hope that as long as you do what you're supposed to do, not saying that it's going to go perfectly. It's not going to go perfectly. But if it happened for me, it will happen for you. If you just allow your support to support you and do the right thing, do what you're supposed to do. No room for error. You know, these are motivation. These are things that motivate you to stay on the path that you're on, you know, that I was on. It motivated me, you know, it helped me say, I can't go back to that. You know, but that stigma, and it was hard because I was used to agreeing with my family just because I was afraid that they weren't going to help me anymore. I'll say yeah when I really meant no, you know, scared that they're not going to help me, scared that they're going to tell me no when I ask for something, you know. So, you know, I utilize them as a support. Sometimes, you know, again, going back to the trust, you know, afraid of being judged, you know, is a matter of trusting your support, trusting people to help you first, because that's hard, you know, coming from whatever background you come from, it's hard to trust. But once you give a little bit, it grows, you know, it grows. And when the support team shows you, you know, because I'm the type of person, you got to show me. I got to see it to believe it, you know. So once I start getting a little bit of support, oh, yeah, that I can do that again, you know. And my hope is for my participants to feel the same way. And I'm going to say 6 out of 9 participants, it works. It works.
Yeah. Thanks, Jewel. That, you know, that's such a great point about needing to have consistent access to these support services, right? Not just intermediately, kind of sporadically. Who else would like to touch on the idea of stigma? Hannah.
Yeah, I have some thoughts that Jewel just kind of put in my mind too, because, you know, for one, just, you know, first, Kristen, you touched on, the process of birth and birth planning and medical intervention and things like that. And we know, you know, once again, that intersectionality, right? So as you add layers of marginalization, so as you add the stigma of substance use and addiction, regardless of, you know, someone's recovery status, and then you add all of the other intersecting layers of someone's identity, and that starts to bulk up, right, and become potentially more and more and more stigmatizing and marginalized. We know that as someone is increasingly in society more marginalized, there are a slew of complications that those identities tend to experience, just in terms of the medical profession, right? In terms of bedside manner and rapport with physicians in terms of increase in unnecessary medical intervention. And those subsequently are also correlated to things like postpartum depression and anxiety. So once again, going back to that whole concept of like, you know, someone's journey in terms of parenting stress in recovery, and how a decrease in parenting stress really is related to all of these structural entities and experiences. You know, but Jewel put something in my mind as well, you know, and like, I think this is a really universal concept that mothers, especially in America, tend to experience recovery or not. It's certainly somewhat culturally related, but I think it's a really universal concept, which is that of the motherhood load, right? Like this very heavy load of mothers tending by and large to be it all, right? And when I think about that, even for myself as a mom in recovery, and you know, and I had my child when I had you know, 8 years of abstinence-based recovery, so I had a little bit of time. But I think that it really, I don't even think that it matters so much as to like where someone's at on their journey in their recovery process, or what their status is. I think, you know, there is that cultural stigma within this country of mothers doing and being it all. But I think it's also an internalized stigma that I have to process as well. And what that looks like for me, and the added complexity of that as a person in recovery, right? Like, you know, we've talked about this before, you know, how do I get to, you know, I personally go to 12-step meetings, you know, how do I get to my baseline of meetings every week for myself, right? And then all of the feelings and conflict that comes up if I am, you know, trying to get a babysitter one night for my child in order to get to a meeting, and what that means for me, and all of the feelings of, you know, shame and guilt, and whatever else that comes up at that time, you know. So, you know, I think there is a cultural phenomenon at large of mothers doing and being it all. And I think it becomes much more complicated in recovery, whatever someone's pathway looks like, whether that is, you know, a peer support group, or it's a 12-step fellowship, or it's like some adjunctive program that someone's doing. There's so many pathways out there, counseling, whatever someone might be doing. And it may be none of those things, whatever that person needs. But I think that that's something that as a mother in recovery, I've really been processing the last 3 years since becoming a parent in recovery, is, you know, what Jewel was saying, the resources, right? Like, and putting my feelers out there of, can I ask for help? Let me see what happens if I just stick my toe in a little bit to the water and I ask for help. What is the response going to be from my community and from the people around me when I ask for help, or I ask for resources or support, or whatever it is? Because there's a lot of internalized shame that I struggle with as a mom, as a working mom in recovery, like all of these different identities that I have. So thank you, Jewel, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and then just navigating the different types of, I don't know, outlets, or being able to connect with somebody and figure out how to let off the steam of all the responsibility that we impose on ourselves and society imposes on us as mothers too. It's, where do I let the pressure out, right? I can't go to a bar anymore. I could, but it would be a disaster, right? Can't sit down and have mommy juice is what we call it now, right? Like a whole bottle of wine, or 3 in my case. So it's how are we letting the pressure off too, you know? So Patti, I saw you take yourself off mute.
Yeah, there's a lot of really, really good things, and I could probably write a novel on any of these. So like, I think about the expectations, especially things that you're told when you're new in recovery about 90 meetings in 90 days and things like that. But I'm sorry, but if you've got kids, that's just not a thing. And then if you bring your kids with you to the meeting, you get side eyes, man. And then if your kids are particularly rambunctious and not perfectly well behaved, well, then there's more of that, right? And then another thing that I had to think about too, as a mother personally, is that I didn't have children until I was, I want to say, about 7 or 8 years into recovery. So while I saw lots of kids there, I knew that all of these kids had seen their parents go through this stuff, and they had already been exposed to some heavy stuff. And it was important for those kids' journeys to be able to see people come back from that stuff. And like, here's what you do when you get in this place. Here's what you do. Because kids never do what you tell them anyway. They do what you do. So I understood that, and I had a lot of respect for the strength that took for people that did that. But given the fact that my children had never seen or been through any of that stuff, is that really something that I want to expose them to? Should I do that to them? Is that harming them? And so for me, I was very, very selective about who I would let them interact with, and who we would get close to. And so far that's been really good, because there's been a number of situations where it's just better that my kids were not attached to these people. And I didn't like, and the things that you hear, the demeaning things to women and the sexual things that you hear in the rooms all the constant time, that's not something I want my kids around. And I don't want my kids around anybody who would talk like that or believe any of that stuff anyway. So those are things like that. But if you're respecting your boundaries that way, and you make a decision that way, and then when you're having a hard time and you do reach out to somebody, they're like, well, are you going to your meetings? Are you working your steps? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Oh, well, then it's your own fault that you're in this situation, which is not the kind of thing that's really needed. And I think the biggest relief about motherhood and recovery was when I was talking to somebody who had no experience with having their kids removed, no experience with having any addiction themselves. Hell, her mom was a therapist. Actually, her mom was my therapist when I was a teenager, now that I remember that. So like, I was talking with her, and I was listening to her say the stuff that she said. And it just kind of dawned on me that, like, this parenting and recovery thing is not hard because something's wrong with me. Like, it's hard because it's hard. It's hard because it's hard. It's got nothing to do with, my parents having had an addiction, or growing up poor, or, dealing with substance use of my own, or because there's something just innately wrong with me. This isn't hard because there's something wrong. It's just hard. And that was like probably one of the biggest reliefs, and it made it so much easier to forgive myself. Which, talking about that internalized stigma stuff, yeah, me too, absolutely. And the messages that are out there all the time, and the constant conflicting messages that are about it, recovery or not recovery, just being a mom in general, there's so many things, right? And there's so many double standards for, traditional male people who are present as traditional cis male parents versus cis women. And then, there's a whole lot of other complicated stuff in between, in the way that society treats somebody who doesn't fall into those two categories. And then so one thing that I hear a lot from people is like, and I used to do this too. I used to say, I'm very lucky to have a very active 50-50 partner with the housework, and let's be real, it's not always 50-50. Okay. So, but he's also willing to, like, step in when I've got more stuff, we work it out. I used to say that I was really lucky for that, but, I kind of really realized, like, no, he's just raising his kids. That once again puts the idea on it that this is all my responsibility, and, it's a gift if I'm not doing it all by myself. So that was just like my own mental thing that I had to change. No, I'm not taking anything from him. He's a parent. He has a house. He has cars, he has bills. So if he's the one that has to take care of that, I'm not doing anything to him by expecting him to do that. He's a parent. That was something that I had to change, because that's something that we just accept is a thing among women all the time. And we need to, I'm sorry, but either we think men are children, or we respect them enough to hold them accountable as partners. And that's not causing somebody harm. So like there's all of that stuff. And then when I think about the families that I work with, they're already so buried in so much shame and stigma already, like they can't even care. Like they can't. But we keep asking them to. Like it's got to be like, okay, maybe you're not ever going to get that minivan. Maybe you're not ever going to get to home ownership. Maybe that's not a thing that's ever going to happen. And maybe they're a parent who spanks. Maybe they're a parent who continues to smoke weed. Maybe they're a parent who is still a dancer because that's the only way that she can make money. That needs to be okay. It needs to be okay. It needs to be good enough. We need to stop removing children because somebody's lifestyle makes them really uncomfortable. If they're fed, they're cared for, their basic needs are covered, that is more harmful to the child than anything that parent is doing. And there's a lot of evidence to show that the removal of kids does more damage to them than the abuse that they would be removed for. I could write a novel on that. But so yeah, this is one of the ways that I'm constantly combating stigma on both sides of whichever community that I'm working with. Like I mentioned before, I'm either explaining that substance use does not mean that somebody just needs Jesus and is not, a criminal. It's not a criminal thing. Even though it is criminalized, it's not a criminal thing. And then when I go to the recovery community, I have to explain to them how often social services gets it wrong. And that does not necessarily mean that if children are removed, that they should have been, or that somebody's addiction, which by the way, I do know somebody whose children were removed for a pen piece that supposedly had residue on it, and they never even let her see it. So there was never even an addiction there in the first place. So there's just so many things people need to understand that, like in the recovery community, because we do have a lot of acceptance and leeway and forgiveness and kindness for a lot of other areas, but man, not for moms, not for women in general. And that's something I think we can do better with.
Absolutely. Right on. Thank y'all so much. Thank you so much for all of that. I needed to hear all of that. Ileana, we do have some questions in here in the Q&A, but I wanted to give you the opportunity though, because you've had such a great, when we talked about this conversation in the past, you had a lot of really great points on stigma in your own experience. So I wanted to come to you and see if you wanted to add anything to the conversation and then follow up with one of these questions in the Q&A.
Sure, I was actually starting to write some out. So in terms of stigma, I think a lot of you covered a lot of what we as women in recovery and mothering during our recovery process. I think a lot of you have already covered a lot of that. I would say on top of that, for me, it was the fact that I'm a Latina. The fact that I'm Latina, and that's another layer of stigma that we have to deal with. A person, of color, a person is a person of Black and brown communities, because my children are from a Black man. And so the stigma we faced was big as well. It was something that was very impactful. I was very fortunate to live in a community of with Black and brown folks, and so we fit in really well. But when going to schools and things like that, and having to face the principals and things like that, because my son had severe behavioral issues, and it was just something that I felt so much shame around, that when I had to go to the school and have to face the principals or the other psychologists, psychiatrists, all the people that were involved in his life, it was hard, because I felt like I was being judged, not just as a woman who used substance, but a person who is also a person of color. And I don't know, that's something that was always so hard for me to handle in my recovery. And if I had not had such a strong spiritual group of women, other women in recovery with more time than me, but were Black and Latinas who went through the same experiences that I had, I think that I may not have made it, because it was really heart-wrenching for me. And I would cry sometimes because I just didn't want to have to deal with these situations on my own. And it was really scary. And I moved to Boston, and none of my family was in Boston. I was by myself with my 4 kids. My family is originally from New York. And so they were all living out there. So I was by myself facing these big old systems that I had never, ever had to face in my life, you know. And then even the awareness of having 4 children in active addiction, then now facing the fact that I'm in recovery and they're in recovery, and how do you do this? You know, it was just, and it was difficult because him acting out on the bus or in school or whatever, and I'm looking like I have no control over my child. Of course, I'm being judged. What a horrible mother. And oh, she's Puerto Rican. Don't you see why her kids are, you know, acting out and all this other stuff? So it was really hard. I would literally cry at night because it was so traumatic for me to raise my kids. And so that was really hard. But I'm looking at some of the questions, and one of the questions in the chat box, the first one from Michelle Nepp, is, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. Do you have any suggestions for helping women want to engage in recovery services? So what I did for my career, I went to school, I got my master's degree, little by little, chipping away, because my kids really were, it was hard to do with my kids. I didn't even have a GED when I started my recovery. And I was 32 years old, and I had never gotten my GED. So I didn't get my GED till I was 32. And then little by little, I went to school and got my degree. So I chipped away with it. It took me almost 10 years to do it, but I finally did. And I started working in recovery homes for women and children. And I did that for over 20 years, first at the outpatient, then in the residential program. And one of the things that right now in our country, I'm hoping some states are better than others in terms of the recovery support services, the peer recovery support services that are available. So I would suggest that if there are recovery centers in peer-run recovery centers, that people start going there just to visit, especially as people are transitioning out of residential, or if they're starting to transition out of their outpatient programs, that they find another place where they can feel comfortable amongst people like-minded, so that they have a place that's safe, that's accepting, and will provide them with services. They have tons of resources available. So one of the things I would suggest is that trying to tap into what's in your area and have the clients or participants of your program, just go visit them, make it a field trip, call the place, introduce yourself, and say, we would like to come down and check you guys out. You know, introduce yourselves, make connections out there. So that would be one of my suggestions. And I don't know if you would like to take the rest, Kristen.
Thank you, Ileana. We have 1 minute left, which is just horrible to me. I'm so sorry. This should be a much longer conversation. I did wanted to ask our panelists just one kind of final wrap-up question, and also give a big thank you to everybody that presented. Also, you can catch the next Recovery Live here on the slide. But Bina, if you wouldn't mind just going to stop share again so that we can see everybody together for this last sort of comment. Thank you so much. In one word, how would you sum up being a mom in one word? And I think my word is joy. And we'll go to Ileana next, since you're off mute already.
I would say being a mom in recovery was very,
One word.
one word, okay. Empowering.
Good one. Hannah.
Healing.
That's a good one. Thank you. Jewel.
Motivating.
Thank you, Jewel. And Patti, our grounder.
This is really hard. I think I'm going to go with adventurous.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I went for either from joy to hard. It's hard. It's really hard. Well, thank you all so much. This was a phenomenal start to a discussion. I feel like we could probably talk about it for 3 more days. For those of you that asked questions that we did not get to, I'm so sorry. Please feel free to email me your contact information, and I will connect you with the speakers or resources that you are looking for. Thank you again for joining us, and please check us out next month. Next Recoveries Live is going to be awesome. It's on harm reduction, which is always a fun topic. So please register today. It is free, of course, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you again, ladies. Thank you so much. Take care.